I want to thank David and Deborah and the B&H event space for having me today. I came here about 5 years ago when this event space first started, and I think we huddled around my laptop. So the room has changed quite a lot since that time. I'm very thrilled to be here. I was supposed to come, I think the day that Sandy hit or the day after, and so we had to postpone, and so it's great to see so many people in the audience. And I live in Maine, and last night it was snowing, and it was accumulating on the ground, and I was like, no, I've got to get there. So I'm really thrilled to be here this morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my process and why I make work, and through that, these stories that have developed. For many years, I fell in love with photography at the age of 13 and just felt so utterly committed to this medium. But for many years was working in a void, not really understanding the power of photography, knowing that I loved it, but hadn't quite found a voice or a style. And it took me to go to the workshops, the main photographic workshops, and spend this wonderful gift of time where I spent a couple of years up there really sort of thinking and having the conversations, like in this room, that found a group that I could talk to. It was like going to photo heaven, and I was first in and I was last out, and I just was soaked everything up. And it's where I really learned the very simple idea that photographs could be about things rather than of things. And that, for me, the moment someone said that, was sort of this. It was actually Brenton Hamilton. It was a light bulb went off in the back of my mind that I could make pictures about things. And at that moment, my work really shifted. My work became less about target practice and more about this idea of what was happening and planning a photograph beforehand. So I started making work in one room. I had traveled a great deal and lived in. I really had the travel bug, and I was impassioned to pick up my camera when I traveled, but not when I was at home. And I decided, well, how would it be, right, to live with eyes and senses so wide open as you do when you travel? I mean, when you travel, your smell is like that of a fox, and everything's new. And so I thought, well, how would it be to live like that in my own home or within one room? So I moved to Maine. And I made a body of work in one room for 3 months. And at the time, I thought it was a lot about autobiography. So I would look back on these past stories, and I still do, and I work in these long accordion notebooks, and I would brainstorm these ideas about past events and experiences and think about, well, how do I make that visual? Because that's our job, right? Our job is to make the unseen seen, taking an idea and to make it visual. So I'd brainstorm metaphors and symbols and gesture, light, so that we're talking, so that everything sort of spoke in the voice that I wanted it to, that would help the story. And I still work in this way for any commercial job, for my personal work, for any job. I still work in this way because that's what we're all doing here, right? We're all trying to find a way to make the unseen seen. So every weekend I would get to work. I would put the coffee on, and I drank a lot of coffee, and all day I would make pictures in this very small area. So that everything became, these pictures are self-portraits predominantly, whether I'm in the frame or not. This was about, the pear was a metaphor, and it was about being close to the edge. It was about balance. And this body of work actually was, it was 100 pieces, and it was shown at Choate Rosemary Hall at the end. It took about 2.5 years to make, but it started off white on white, through to gray on gray, gray on black to black on black. So using the language of light and black and white and shadow to really tell the story. And overall, it was a story about unrequited love. It was about trying to, suffering a betrayal and trying to overcome that, trying to find a sense of self-worth and self-confidence and identity. So this image was about hope and my bitten down nails. I worked at this time with a Hasselblad in film. You know, and again, I would try and shoot at least 12 rolls. That was my thing. And then I would go to the darkroom and I had a 6-tank apiece. So it was a great arm workout, multitasking. And I would spend all day Sunday in the darkroom. I think you have to be in love with the process of making, right? I loved being in the darkroom and what I could make in that babbling brook. You know, and the smell, I love the smell of stop bath. I loved it. You know, so I would process the film and I would be so excited to see what I had made just the day before. And I really try, even though I'm not shooting film right now, I really try and keep that excitement and try not to sort of, you know, look into the back of my camera. I try and sort of save the editing and the processing time as if it were, you know, the day later and I'm entering the darkroom. It's a different part of my brain that's shooting and then making. So this body of work really sort of started to evolve. I had no idea that's what I was making at the time, that it would be this story of self-identity. I was just, you know, finding out ways of one story led to the other, and I started using the props in the photographs. It became really important for me that they were props where something had happened or they were something that I did own. It wasn't that I just went to an antique store and collected a vase. You know, it was like something had happened to me in this dress. Now, that's only important for me, and I'm not going to tell you what happened, but you know, it's this idea that we have to find a way that we're in love with our own pictures, and that putting these adages so that your stories live on. Something happens when you sort of really put the personal, I think, into your photographs that somehow it's almost like they're cooking with a bit of extra salt. Something happens and it somehow resonates with people. This was a picture I made when I tried to sort of think about this idea that you know, who are you making your work for? And I challenge each of you to that question. Who is the audience for your work? Who are you making your pictures for? And immediately I would have said, absolutely myself. But then I realized that actually that wasn't true, that I was making this portfolio for someone that would never see it. And so I would record my dreams again in these long journals, you know, anything that I was interested, the lyrics of a song, the book, a line from a book, anything. I truly believe that everything's connected, and our subconscious, you know, which is how we photograph, right? Our subconscious is so much more advanced than our conscious mind. So it's an amazing thing to give a group of people a camera, just go out there in the world, and then you never have to process the film, but just looking at what they've made is so telling to what they're necessarily going through or what they're drawn to. So I started trying to include objects in pictures that were less classically beautiful, like beds and vases. I was trying to sort of push at homages to other photographers. This was about being tethered to my past rather than tied taut to it. And photographs appearing from earlier times in the newer pictures, reminding me where I didn't want to be again. Now, when I look back at this work, I realize that, you know, I thought it had everything to do with autobiography. I was wrong. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with fantasy. My own life at this time was so dark that I decided to use photography as an escape, and that's still what I do in many ways. So my life was here, and my pictures were here. I chose to live in that white, fantastical land where everything was clean and everything was simple, and compositionally everything made sense because it provided this balance for me. And I see that again and again and again in my students' work, that they're drawn to you know, the landscape as a place of escapism. Photography as escapism, I think that's a wonderful thing. You know, every time that I say I'm not going to do something in photography or go down one road, sure enough, a year later I'm doing it. It's an amazing medium. I feel so honored that this is my life. I'm a lifer in this. I realize that you open one door in photography, and there's 27 other doors right behind it. And you have to be in this for life, I feel like, to do anything more than sort of scratch the surface. So, you know, when I look back at this work, I see it, I use photography as a way to heal. And the sign of the pineapple. So even though these pictures were very minimal, every part of them were really considered. You know, again, these journals and thinking, well, how can I say that? You know, if a rose is a symbol for love, well, then that's a cliche. So how can we create a language that still means that still is universal but not expected, and that's been a big challenge for me. This was the story that an old wives' tale in England, where you peel the skin of an apple and it will tell the initials of who you'll marry. And the highlights in this work, this was the last section, the very dark, and the highlights barely escaped off the page. I would spend hours in the dark room to make these prints speak just so. And, you know, for me, this was a very interesting image I made, because it was the first time that I really understood what a landscape photograph could be. I had studied the work of Robert Adams, and if you've not read Beauty in Photography, you must run out right now and go get it. There's a great chapter called The Landscape in Photography that is extraordinary. And it talked about the idea that the landscape could be an internal reflection of what you are feeling inside. And that idea blew the back of my mind off. I suddenly got it. So I went out and I searched for a landscape that really reflected how I felt during this time of betrayal. I was working with the Hasselblad at this time. You know, really one lens, one camera, for pretty much, you know, it was about 7 or 8 years, one lens. I wanted the pictures to feel different because the idea was different, not because I switched up my equipment. But I definitely see I got into the Hasselblad. I'm not sure if any of you have shot with the Hasselblad, but there was that tendency with an 88 lens, everything got 3 feet away. I see that when I look at some of this work. This was a metaphor for what I did with words, the words that he gave me, and how I would complicate these threads, these threads he had given me. So often, you know, I would start off with ideas, a list of metaphors and props I might want to get, and really that was just giving me a place to start, right? When your Saturday or your day off or every day, if you're lucky enough, comes around, how do we begin? Because there's such a beauty in beginning, right? And so this gave me a place to begin, that when Saturday came around, I knew I was going to start with half a globe and suspended from the ceiling. And then, and I really have to stress this, I had to let go of all my preconceived ideas. The moment I picked up my camera, I had to trust that you know, it couldn't be so organized and contrived. And if I forced it, then the pictures looked forced. So I really had to let go of all of those ideas beforehand and just see what came out. And often it was the images that I least expected. I once filled a room full of leaves, and it was talking about sort of living in this underworld at this time. And it was in Maine, and luckily there were lots of leaves. It wouldn't be searching like in New York, but I think I filled up something like 20 trash bags, the big brown ones full of leaves, and filled this room so it was sort of waist height. Well, ultimately, the picture that I loved was the one that there was only 3 in my hair. You know, and it literally took me, I think it was 6 months later, I was still seeing leaves everywhere. And, you know, so what I'm saying here, these ideas of sort of creating in advance, these ideas, they're really a place to start. And even on commercial work, you know, I get hired for not as a day rate, but as a creative fee. So I pitch, you know, I get there's an initial meeting, and then I brainstorm, and I brainstorm in the exact same way as I would my personal work. And then I pitch those ideas to the agency or a group of creatives. So when I made this, this was the last picture I made from that series. I used Mozart as a stand-in for him, and I made this body of work into an artist book, which is another passion of mine. And I spent 3 months in January and February in Maine in a building with no heat, in the darkroom, printing this work. What I would do was I would throw, they had a similar ceiling similar to here, and I would throw hair dryers over the wire bit, like poke up through the, whatever that's called, throw hair dryers over, and literally the way the room was heated was it would blast. I had 3 hair dryers blasting above the sink, so highly dangerous. And I would literally print this work, and I would like be crying in the sink. I would listen to Meatloaf or Sarah McLachlan. Meatloaf, Sarah McLachlan. And there came to this point where I was like, enough. So I made this. And this was a series where I really, when I changed to color, I mean, it was literally overnight, and I've not made a black and white photograph since. This was in 2003, and I exploded into color. And I think it was just because this idea of really looking at that past story, and I was done. You know, this idea of art as therapy, maybe I think of it more as art, as mark making, and these are all things that every single person in this room goes through. Everyone's fallen in love, had the heart broken, lost someone, been brave, had hope. Every one of us, it's fundamental human condition, you know. So I burst into color and really sort of wondered if I could use it as a way to shroud and to hide my secrets. A lot of the work in this portfolio, which is called Eyes Like Disappointed Lemons, is actually coming from quite a dark place. But I wanted to take the color and see if I could distort that. And I think I did a pretty good job. This is called the Daydream. The meal back then. This is called sleep apnea. When I had lived with this guy for 5 years, for the last year I would wake up probably every week, and then it would happen like 5 times a week. I would wake up in the middle of the night and I couldn't breathe, and I would gasp for air, and the only way I could sort of normalize was by getting water. And the moment I moved out, I never had it again, not once. It was clearly psychological. It wasn't. Maybe I don't know what. I never went to anyone, but so I made this picture because it reminded me that I never wanted to be that person again. So again, it comes back to this ideas that you know, photography can be so much more than just the prints. It can be this life and this sort of this thing that walks alongside you, that creates balance in our lives, gets us out when we need to, shows us things, that perhaps shines a light on families and situations that you would never ever have thought you would have met if you didn't have a camera. I mean, who's had this experience where they've walked out on the street, met someone, made their portrait? You would never have met them unless you had the camera. You would just be some weird person staring. These cameras legitimize, they allow us into people's lives. There are mirrors on our own lives. It's sort of this extraordinary medium. I don't know of a medium quite like it, and I'm so humble to that. So I made this portrait to symbolize a friend that was going through a very hard time. I had painted a whale onto a canvas and was talking about sort of the weight carrying someone through this time period. So what I'm saying here, that I'm making pictures for exactly the same reason my grandmother made pictures, to remember. You know, she might choose to remember birthdays and Christmas, or I'm choosing to remember maybe more sort of unusual times photographically. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing to remember. For me, when I look at that, it's the same as having a picture of him and I, like this together. This was called the borrowed prom dress. And I literally did borrow this dress for about 10 years. I returned it about a year ago, which is terrible. She's still a good friend, thank goodness. Self-portrait as Mary. So using color to seduce. I think of being a photographer as being this trafficker of seduction. You have to make people want to look at your images first, right? And then to say, oh, there's content. So form and content coming together to really sort of, I think that's the most powerful for me in work that I really respond to, is when these two elements, the form, so how it looks, you know, the light, the color, the frame, all of this stuff, you know, how we make a picture. But then if it's only that, then it's void of content. So then the content coming in, what are you trying to say? Photography is such an opportunity to say something about the world. What would you say if you had a pencil in your hand? You know, something. So it's the same thing with a camera, right? It's just a different form of a pencil, slightly more high tech. This is from a series called The Impossible Tasks, and it was about being up against something so much bigger than yourself and not having the tools at hand to deal with it. So it was often I would find myself in situations where I sort of felt completely overwhelmed. I was going through a difficult time, and rather than just necessarily just sitting there and sort of drinking lots of wine or something, I went out and I made pictures, making order out of chaos, taking the chaos of life and making an orderly photograph. That makes sense to me. To sort of walk into the dark room with like, oh, not understanding things, and then coming out with this gorgeous print. What a way to live. You know, and I really think of art and photography as this bucket, this place where you pour in all your concerns, and that could be if you're a landscape photographer or a street shooter, it's still pouring in your concerns, right? That's what you're doing. And then you come out somehow with this 2D piece of paper, slips into your pocket, off you go down the street. There's something that, you know, there's something there in this medium that helps us sort of process this world. Order out of pain, beauty out of chaos. I think all photographs are inherently beautiful by what they, by their very nature. During this time, I was using a film called Fuji Reala. It was a non-professional film. It was very, very reasonable. I think it was like 218 here. And when they discontinued the first time, slippery, they did the discontinue the first time. I bought 800 rolls from David because I was, you know, we were finding them from everywhere. And I was so concerned. I was such a film such a film shooter that I couldn't possibly fathom that I would shoot anything else but Fuji Reala. I had to buy a fridge, of course, because 800 rolls don't fit in your, my husband, well, he was my boyfriend at the time, he was not impressed with all this film. So, and I would overexpose it to get the colors. Often people ask me, well, how do you get your colors? There is no trickery in the sense of in post, unless you call sort of dodging and burning and you know, a little bit of vignetting, darkening the corners in some prints. And I still keep that methodology today with my Photoshop work. I try and make it all in camera. I approach the dry darkroom, the computer, like it is the wet darkroom. And so I would just overexpose everything to get these intense colors. Like literally my negatives, I would pull them, they would be black. And that was for heaven for me. You know, and I would sometimes be in the darkroom to, you know, exposing, I printed all my own color work. I was lucky, I was a professor associate professor assistant for the last 10 years at AIB, and we had this wonderful color darkroom. And I would spend my weekends there printing color as well as, you know, black and white. It's a beautiful thing. But literally, because they were so overexposed, these negatives, I would be there for, I don't know, 5 minutes with the, you know, exposing through the negative to get something on paper. So this is how it felt. It felt sort of so futile. This next series was from it's a couple of images from a group called Archaeology of Distraction, and it was about always being sort of too late or too early for the event. Definitely inspired by painting. I mentioned earlier, inspired a lot by literature. I really think every movie that you're drawn to or what you're reading, somehow it's all connected. So I make a note in these visual source books and just try and pull everything together. So this body of work, I think, it very much as this sort of work went on, the camera started pulling back. If you think about that first black and white portfolio, how close the camera was, everything was 3 feet away, and gradually, and the work was so inward, and gradually as the work became over time much more outward, the camera started sort of pulling away. I worked with a lot of self-timers. People ask me how I made these as self-portraits. I had an arsenal of different, and this is still all Hasselblad work of air releases and little tick things that went around. I used to buy them up. Occasionally you'd have them here. And so I had a whole series. And occasionally, like the channel marker one where I'm standing on the channel marker, my dad helped me take that picture. Terrible assistant, kept cleaning his boat in between. But so I would do whatever I could to get the picture. Sorry, you had a question. Okay, yeah. So that's normally how I would, a whole different variety of self-timers. And I think what it was doing with this idea that I was sort of slowly stepping back, it was reminding me that that I was out there in the world, and that this world was this sort of amazing place. And the act of making a picture, and I'm sure many of you feel this way, photography puts me on a dock at dawn, at dusk. It puts me in a field of fireflies. I wouldn't get up otherwise, I don't think. I love getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, but to get up without a camera, why? Where's the evidence? Where's the, photography as witness? And so I think that, photography, it reminded me that this world was so amazing. This cave image was so black in there. I mean, I could, the pictures always look so elegant, but often the act of making them is very inelegant. And, stumbling around trying to find a spot. And then to see this on the negative, that this is what the world was like down there. My eyes couldn't show me this. It was the camera that could. And what an amazing thought that these photographs shine a light on a side, whether it's something we physically can't see or we mentally can't see. How photographs can do that. And clearly I'm a romantic, I'm not a realist. It's still using photography in a sense as this sort of form of escape to celebrate the world. That for me is really important, and that's not something I picked or selected, it's just the way that I am. I feel like if every one of us made enough work, if every day we went out and we shot 70 pictures a day, there would be no discussion about what your style or voice would be. It's just there. You don't get to pick it. You don't get to pick your projects. It's in you and they come out, if you work hard enough. I'm big into the discipline of art. I try and make pictures when I don't want to. I liken it to the gym. I often you don't want to go, and then afterwards I'm like, awesome, glad I went. So I definitely think of that. It's not about sort of, let me be inspired today and tie on my smock. It's about, this is my job, this is my work, and I'm very lucky to live this life and to live a life that is one of imagining. But it is definitely a discipline, and there is the work element, the 9 to 5, which I think is really important. And when I was teaching at AIB, we would discuss that a lot. And there's a weight that comes with that, and I think that's really beautiful. That it's not, if we only made pictures when we were inspired, we wouldn't make enough pictures. And it's the act of getting out there, suddenly you're inspired, but you weren't beforehand. The creative road, I think, once you step down it, then so many more doors open up. you can never imagine what a portfolio is going to look like at the beginning, because the act of making art, each step, it's like driving at night. You just got to trust that the road that the bit you need will be illuminated. If you know what your portfolio is going to look like right at the beginning, then I would challenge you that it's too easy. The act of making art then shows itself, and in any campaign. So then there was a shift happened around 2007. Around 2005, but this was the day that we moved into our house. And I had always, Doug and I met Doug and my pictures changed. Instead of looking back on the past and analyzing, these past experiences and thinking about it, I was suddenly like, whoa, there's a life going on, girl, and you're in it. So stop setting aside time to make pictures and just carry around your camera. What an idea. The idea that, it's so much easier to take a picture when you have a camera. Who was it who said that? Dwayne Michaels. So much easier to make a picture when you're holding a camera. So then I started carrying around my camera with me always to record. This was the day that we first moved into our house, which is called the Hope Chest. And it's about this life, and it's about sticky feet and jumping in. This is Doug. Those are not his underpants on the floor. People often ask. It's a napkin. Joking. So it was about turning, that this was about a life that was happening, this sort of quotidian daily life, buying a house. I had always traveled, and so had Doug, and this idea that, as Keith Carter says, to belong somewhere. I had wanted to belong somewhere a long time, but it wasn't until I moved to Maine full-time that I really felt I belonged somewhere. And so I made pictures in this house, in this space of our relationship, really sort of trying to look at this time that was so desperately happy and so desperately in love. A new garden, what was the symbolism of the garden? And this guy that was nurturing this land. Dinner, yeah. And it's not that, our lives were suddenly all, let's skip along here and with our picnic basket. A lot happened during that time too. I made this picture. Doug's father in June was, cycling every day, and then he had a bit of a bad back. By August 9th, on his birthday, he passed away 2 months later of pancreatic cancer. It was like wildfire spread through this extraordinary man's body. And I made this picture to remind me of that. This was my niece that had come to stay, and they had planned their summer holiday. They were here, and we planted this memorial tree in our field. And as we did so, this mist rolled in, and it was sort of extraordinary. So it's not that art has to be good or bad or happy or sad. It has to be felt, right, by you, the makers. What are you trying to say? What are you feeling about the world? And so that for me was so important. And I, all I could do was make stews at this time, and I liken making stews and cooking. I like to live slowly. It doesn't always happen. I end up being busy a lot, but I do like to live slowly. And I think, stew making and photography is not so different. It's this idea of the chopping and preparing. So that's like the books for me, and the brainstorming and the metaphor and the symbol and the light. And then, the act of shooting, and that's when it's cooking. And then afterwards, you're, the editing process, and that's probably the eating. I don't know, but it just seems like the time that it takes in photography from, I can't decide if a picture's good right away. I often have a feeling. But it takes time for me for it to live with an image to see if it's got any legs, right? And I feel the same way about stew. It's always better the second day. And so during this time period, all Doug could do was strip the house of paint, and which it needed, but it was raining. It was the summer where it did not stop raining. So he was in the rain stripping paint, and I made stews and pictures. And that's what we did for a couple of months. Oh, sorry, wrong way. The unsent letter. and Scarlet in the Snow. And then slowly, in this sort of, the work started to include this community that I lived in, you know, and started with this gift. I was actually on a commercial shoot. I try and do as many commercial shoots as possible up in Maine, because, you know, Maine's just easy. Everything's, you know, the post office, there's no queue. It's very easy. I'm a country mouse. I love coming to the city, but I am a country mouse. And so I do a lot of book covers. Book covers are my bread and butter. You know, and I try and always shoot it in Maine, because you don't have to pay for permits and all. It's just simpler. Well, anyway, I was shooting over here, a whole series of models, and then Emmy was waiting in the truck. And this is probably the best image I think I've ever made. And it was a one-frame deal. I turned, she was there waiting for her dad. We had rented a truck from him, waiting for her dad to finish work. And she looked at me, and I just knew there was something that I could never have planned. In my little books, I would never have written, oh, little girl looking out of a truck with a snowstorm. You know, it just doesn't work like that. And it's perhaps so I think photography is about realizing when something is happening in front of you that might be much larger than you. And she must have been standing on the brakes, because those are the brake lights. But I think, you know, I'm always searching drama in pictures, and that's something I really push for now. And, you know, weather. You know, I had gone through a stage where I never took pictures in the rain. It was like, it had to be a lovely sunny day all the time. And, you know, how crazy is that? You know, our cameras, people make pictures in Scotland, they dry off. They're no use to you if they're just sitting on a shelf, you know? So now my cameras they're always like sticky, because I have a baby, everything's like sticky and messy. And, you know, if they have a lesser shelf life, but I'm using them, that's so important. So I want to encourage all of you to get your cameras out, and they'll wear and tear, but they're no use if they're just sitting on a shelf. So, you know, I always try now, when the weather's hideous, I always take pictures, and it creates a drama in photographs. So I started photographing this community, and I think that this idea, these portraits are often collaborations. Often they're people I know. I would say always they're people I know, family, close friends. And what I'm trying to do is, I've always been interested in the universal in photography. You know, and I think I did that before by cutting my head off in many of the pictures. And I don't feel like you have to do that, but that's what I did. But I think that what I'm trying to do is find out what is universal in a photograph or in a painting. You know, how can it transcend from beyond just a picture of, you know, someone to a picture of every man, or every, you know, the human condition. And that's something that I'm really interested in. I don't know the answers to it yet. You know, and especially I have a young baby now, and I'm trying to decide, well, when is it just a picture of a really cute, round, fat baby, and when is it, you know, about humankind? And I think that's a great question to, you know, constantly be grappling with. And I think, again, you know, this idea of photography, you answer one question and there are 27 more posed. I mean, what an exciting way to live. And the best thing is, you just get better and better with age with photography. And so, you know, we picked the right medium. It would suck to be a singer or something, right? So, yeah, I think that photography and art, I mean, just the work just gets better and better. It's never too late to begin in earnest. I often think of these pictures as you know, are they reflections on me? Or are they, you know, are they portraits? Are they about them? And I think they're actually much more to do with me than these people. But definitely, there's a collaborative process involved. Yeah.
Can you talk a little more about the collaborative process?
Well, I mean, I think I often, you know, so now when I'm going to. So I construct less now, okay? I'm much more interested in finding pictures. But I'll often say, so with Sadie, for example, I'll say, okay, I want to make a portrait of you, and this is what I'm working on right now, these ideas, so that there is an exchange there. So I'm not really directing her, and it might not be that anything great will come of that session that we work together, but I'm going to pick the right light. you know, that perhaps is telling the story, the right sort of props, be aware of things that are happening around us. So I don't think, you know, Sadie isn't a sort of dark psychological girl. She's this wonderfully open, you know, but I think I've made her that way in a picture. So I very much think of them as these people have given us gifts to make their picture. This is Emmy. She had just finished telling me that she was being bullied at school, and so we duct taped rhubarb leaves onto her arms, and we were rhubarb princesses. Anne-Marie and Moose, this is one of my best friends up in Maine. She does duck hunt on the ocean. This is called The Edge of the Storm. Claire and the Forsythia. And Elizabeth in the diner. So I think of these pictures now as this sort of, you know, these locations that I select are more as this stage for the gaze. You know, what is that gaze? Sadie, again. And how do I pick the people that I photograph? I always know them. And they just have something that interests me. That you know, that they have this look, and that is somewhat unusual. That it somehow is very universal, I think. It's my niece Sid. The Velvet City, this is called. Devin and the Fireflies. This is just about a mile away from where I live. And this was a tricky image to make. I tried for a few years. You know, this is one of the only one where there's actually some artificial light popped on her face. Everything else is natural light. You know, I do work with lights. Typically in my commercial shoots, I work with HMIs and the film sets and film lighting. But with my personal work, I like being the only one there, or the only one plus the model or the sitter. You know, I like the act of working alone. You know, I don't want a ton of people around. But there is one, just a little tiny, it's a Nikon flash off to the side that was triggered. And then the background was just a slow enough exposure to get to the dusk, but fast enough that it stilled the fireflies. My back garden. And then something happened around this time. Well, that thing was that I got pregnant, and this is the last few pictures I'm going to show. And you know, I didn't know quite what was going to happen. I didn't know if I'd end up starting putting babies in saucepans and things like that, and pots. And I did do that once. It was very, and it was cute. But I didn't know. But I also trusted this process of photography, that it would lead me there, right? All the way along, I've talked about this act of trusting of your subconscious. And what was very interesting, what's happened in the last year, my baby's now 15 months, Scout, is that the pictures have become very, very dark. Physically, they're very, very dark, and that could be because I'm up at 2 o'clock more than I've ever been up at 2 o'clock in the morning. But what I'm seeing in this work is much more about fear and wonder, and of course it makes sense. I had no idea, but the fear when you bring a baby into the world of just how terrifying. I now drive like the Pope. You know, I used to be a bit of a boy racer, and you know, the fear, but also this amazing wonder in the world. And so that's what I'm seeing in this body of work. And it's not that I've necessarily sat down and brainstormed, you know, how does it feel to be a mother? You know, I'm lucky I've got pants on most days, I'm so tired, you know, but I'm trusting that whenever I pick up the camera, it will show the way, okay? So, you know, and I think that, and you know, Devin and the moths came from this, definitely this fear idea. This is a white witch moth, and it's about confronting your fears. But the wonder of having a child as well, it's just the most extraordinary, as those of you who are parents know. This is the start of Hurricane Leslie. And the spring tree in fog. And this is one of Scout, and I don't know if this is any good, you know, and because it's a recent image and I need to live with it for a bit. But this idea again of what is in the portrait, and I love that, you know, that there needs to be a bit of time for me to process this work.
What are you shooting digital now?
Oh yeah, sorry, I meant to say that. Oh yes, all that big lead up, and I forgot to talk about the transition. So I did make a switch. Just around, it was about 2 years ago I switched, and I started shooting with a Canon 5D Mark II, and it was revolutionary for me. I had gotten to the point where I was only making work, you know, if you think about it, Fuji Reala was a 100 speed film, and I overexposed it. So, and I would shoot with this with, you know, big campaigns like the Kate Spade campaign. My sets, everyone thinks of, you know, commercial sets as being like, yeah, mine were like, everyone hold still, be like a little mouse. I mean, my shutter speeds were like 1 second. No one was allowed to move, no one was to bang anything. You know, I mean, literally, I had the slowest sets in the world because I wanted to overexpose by 2 or 3 stops this already very slow film. So when I picked up the Canon Mark II, I went crazy. I was like, you can photograph at night, you can photograph in you know, in the like blurry light, you can change the ISO. I mean, it was just so, I know it's obvious, but I went crazy. And I realized that I had been getting in the way of myself. I was so reluctant to change, but it doesn't matter what you shoot with, it's about if you're shooting, right? So whatever makes you shoot, then that's the camera, you know? And so I broke my thumb, slammed it in the Volvo door, like literally it was a piece of paper. Anyway, about 3 months ago. And so it came to this point where, it's a bit wonky still, but it came to this point where it was like, oh, I had like my arm in a cast for 6 weeks, I have a baby, and they had the Canon Mark II. And I was like, oh, which one, baby or the Canon? You know, and I'm kidding, the baby one every time. But, you know, so I realized that then I needed a new camera. So I got one of these new Fuji X Pro, love it. You know, so it's whatever you need. I'm not really a big equipment person. You know, if I get too distracted by, oh, with this or that, or, you know, then I stop making pictures. You know, I'm thinking about the act of the pencil rather than what you're going to do with the pencil, right? So, you know, I try and keep it all minimal, but, you know, I say whatever makes you make pictures is the right camera. So for me, it was really revolutionary to be able to have the freedom to shoot at night, to shoot, you know, to shoot whenever I wanted to, without sort of the lag time of film, you know. And obviously you can shoot at night with film, but when you're shooting models at night, then it gets tricky. So, and I really shot, even commercially, I changed 2 years ago. I mean, on the Kate Spade shoot, I shot, I think it was 100 rolls of film. And then I took back that 100 rolls of film to Maine, and it was the weekend. And I was like, oh no, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too hot, it's too cold. You know, I was just like so stressed out about this film. Now, I like check out that we've got everything with my Digitech. I walk away like, yeah, let's have a glass of champagne, it's all over. You know, so I think that, you know, that digital really has so many beautiful uses. You know, it was very stressful days where, you know, this entire massive shoot depended on these 100 rolls of film that were slowly heating up in your car. You know, you can imagine it was really stressful. So, you know, I think that was the big transition for me. And, you know, and I still feel bad though. Whenever I walk, I will never sell my Hasselblads. I walk by them every day, and I miss the sound, that clunk. Amazing. And who's to say that I won't go back? I have a 4x5 as well. A Linhof. I mean, nothing's changing on those bad boys. They're going to stay the same forever. So, you know, I'm not saying that I won't go back to shooting, but right now, my life, it makes sense digital. In terms of post, I do as little as possible. I actually am not a very good Photoshopper, and I need to take classes. So I'm going to end on that last picture of Scout, and I'm going to end with a quote from Callahan. to be a photographer, one must photograph. No amount of book learning, no checklist of seminars attended can substitute for the simple act of making pictures. Experience is the best teacher of all, and for that there is no guarantee that one will become an artist, only the journey matters. So on that note, thank you very much, and I appreciate you all coming. Any questions, of course? Thank you.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.